Hey, everybody, this is Brian Smith, the host of your Grief to Growth, and I am here today with another episode. And today I've got with me Barbara Karnes. And Barbara has written several books, but I think is most known for a pamphlet that she wrote. And I want to talk to Barbara. She is a death expert, I will say. She's written Gone From My Sight, The Dying Experience, which has been very, very popular and has helped a lot of people to understand the dying experience. So while at the bedside of hundreds of people during the dying process, she noticed that each death was following a near identical script. Each person was going through the stages of death in almost the same manner. And most families had the same questions. So these realizations led Barbara to sit down and write the book, The Little Blue Book, the book that changed an industry, Gone From My Sight. It's been in print continuously since 1985 and has sold over 25 million copies. Although it's often imitated, it remains the most widely used patient/family handout on signs approaching death in the United States. It's the original source. With its publication and distribution, Barbara created one of the most important tools in the hospice movement today, the Parent-Family Educational Booklet. So what I want to do today, Barbara, is say, first of all, welcome, and I appreciate you doing this. And let's talk about the dying process and how did you get involved in that?
Well, I started as a hospice nurse, and it was in the 80s when hospice was just coming to this country. And they couldn't even pronounce it, let alone know what it meant. And so we went into people's homes, and we went in there months before death occurred and supported and guided them through their dying process. When I look back today on what we did in the 80s, it was like people today know what we were learning then. We brought forth the knowledge by being at the bedside, because up until hospice started going into the homes, people died at home without support, so only the family was there, or in the hospital, and that was generally at a room at the end of the hall and no one else would go in. So no one was consistently with people who were dying to really know how people die. And so after working with families, I noticed there was a process, and I came to the conclusion that there are only two ways to die. And that's either fast, getting hit by a truck, a heart attack, suicide, or gradual. And gradual death had a process to it. It doesn't just happen. If it just happened, it would be fast death. And so I then started educating what that process is about. And you can kind of ask a few pertinent questions and pretty well tell if a person has months, weeks, days, or hours to live.
What types of questions?
That's how I got started.
Wow. So you asked the dying person these questions?
No, it's as a professional, I now, and anyone in end of life, looks for certain things.
Okay.
You talk to the family, you ask questions, but it's observation that will tell you. And it isn't all medical. Dying is not a medical event. Dying is emotional, a communal event, not a medical, and yet we're making it a medical event. So the things you look for evolve around eating, sleeping, and withdrawing. And you ask questions to the family about those three areas.
Okay. And that gives you an idea of how long the person has.
Yes.
Okay.
There's another, that would be months before death. There are other things that you look for that say a person has weeks, 1 to 3 weeks before death. I call that labor. There are certain things that people do. Key is they'll start sleeping with their eyes partially open. They'll start being restless. They'll start random hand movements, picking at their clothes, at their bedclothes. Their breathing changes. Then there are other changes that say a person is minutes to hours from death. And if you understand what those things are ahead of time, then you're neutralizing the fear, because all of us, not knowing what death is like, bring with us fear to the bedside. And so a big part of end-of-life work is to support the family, to guide the patient, and to neutralize the fear that goes with death and dying.
Sure. So, so you work with not just the patient, but you're also working with the family to help them to accept the transition and understand the transition. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Our medical model is that the medical model works with the patient. End of life model is that they work not just with the patient, but with the family. Because in the dying process, the gradual death dying process, the patient, the person that's dying, is withdrawing from the world around them. And so the deeper they go inside, the less contact they have with the world around them. And they also, in the weeks before death, are confused, they're otherworldly. And so at that, you have to educate the family. Taking care of someone at end of life is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. But most people don't know that. And so end of life work is 90% education, to teach the family that nothing bad is happening, nothing pathological is happening, to help them understand that what dad's doing is normal. This is how people die, and he's doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've heard the term death doula, which is, I think, a fairly recent term. Is that similar to what you do, or is there?
Actually, in the 80s, if you look back at what I did in the 80s as a hospice nurse, it was really what death doulas are doing today.
Okay.
Our goal in the 80s and the 90s was to be with the patient and family at the moment of death. That was our goal. Today, because of Medicare, because of insurance, because of a lot of factors, most family members are alone when their loved one dies at home. And so even if they're on hospice, most of the time they're alone. So that void is being filled by end-of-life doulas. End-of-life doulas are now able to go into the home and be with the family and the patient at the moment of death. That becomes their goal. Okay.
So your job is to make the transition easier, to make everybody feel comfortable, more comfortable. And it sounds like you help the family a lot. How much interaction are you having with the patients in terms of helping them make the transition?
It depends on when I would get involved. If it's months before death occurs, then there's a lot of nurse-patient interaction and talk and support. You let the patient set the pace about what they want to talk about. You look at symptom and control and management, pain management. But you try in the months before death to develop a rapport with the patient, all the time also working with the family. But in the weeks before death, the person who is dying is so removed from their body and from the world around them that there isn't going to be very much interaction at all. And then your whole focus is helping support the family
Mm-hmm.
and guiding them through this experience. The same holds true with hours before death. You know, it isn't, people don't die like they do in the movies. You
Yeah.
know, in the movies, they say something very profound and then, you know,
Yeah.
they're dead. Well, people don't die like that, but we don't know that. And so our work is to guide the family
Mm-hmm.
into interaction and know that the person, although they're not going to be responding to you, they can hear you.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of interaction that I guide the family through in those hours before death.
So do the families, are they ever upset because the person seems to be withdrawing? You know, as you said, I feel like that person, and this is my take on it, they're going into an inner world. I think they're probably preparing to make their transition. Does the family feel like something's wrong there, or does that ever come up?
Well, in the months before death, yes, the families think, you know, what's going on? Dad's not, you know, it starts with, um, in the months before death, the person that's dying isn't interested in their favorite football game, you know, or their team. They're not following it. And gradually they withdraw from what's going on in the world to what's, you know, don't have the church ladies come over. I don't want to visit. And then gradually that person goes completely within.
Mm-hmm.
As an end of life person, part of my job is to help the family understand this is what's happening. It's not that something's wrong with Dad in
Mm-hmm.
him not wanting to follow his football team.
Yeah.
It's that he's starting to withdraw. He's like disconnecting his threads
Mm-hmm.
from this world and building his place in the other world. This world is losing its focus, its importance. And on many levels, this person who is dying is going within.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, what have I done? Who have I touched? What has life been about? They're processing their life, but it's on an inner level. And
Mm-hmm.
so that processing, there's only room for one.
Yeah. Yeah. So I assume your book talks about this and helps families understand this, but you mentioned on your website that sometimes people feel some guilt around the way their loved one transitioned, and they wish they had known this. So I would assume the book would be helpful to someone even after this has happened to understand the process.
Absolutely, because so often the person dies and then the family thinks they're in their grief. They're thinking they did something wrong
Mm-hmm.
in taking care of their loved one. And sometimes they think the medical profession did something wrong in taking care of their loved one. By reading on from my site, they can see that there is a process to dying, and they can see, oh yeah, not eating is part of the dying process. I didn't starve Dad to death by not pushing food. You know, and that's a big guilt that people carry, is that they didn't eat and I should
Yeah.
have fed them.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's part of the normal process, is not eating. We eat to live. It's the gas we put in the car to
Right.
make it run. And if
Right.
the body's preparing to die, it doesn't want the energy that food brings. And so all by itself, it cuts back and stops eating.
You know, it's interesting. My dog, 14-year-old dog, I had to put to sleep a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, this past Saturday, and she put her food down and she would just gobble it all down. And a couple of weeks before she transitioned, she stopped eating as much. And then a couple of days, you know, she wasn't eating. So I made rice for her because I was like, I don't want her to starve. So I just went through this very same thing. It's like, I don't want to starve her. So I think, animals, they have knowledge just like, I think people do. And we have this inner wisdom that you said, that the body's like, why should I eat? I don't need this right now.
Well, and animals die the same way that people die because humans are animals.
Mm-hmm.
And the body is programmed to die, whether it's human or dog or cat. And so dogs and cats and horses, all animals die the same way in that process if they don't get hit by a car out in the street.
Yeah.
So I did write a booklet, like Gone From My Sight, called A Place in Your Heart, A Place in My Heart, which is for animals, for people who have to deal with their animal dying.
Yeah.
They stop eating, they withdraw, they sleep more, all of that, they do just like people.
Yeah, it's all part of the process. And I think a big part of your work, of our work, is to help people understand that death is a part of life. That, as you said, we're all programmed to die. I was having a discussion the other day on Facebook with someone, and we were talking about terminal illnesses, and they said that they think we were discussing euthanasia. But the point was, they were saying this should only be available if you have a terminal illness. And I said, we all have a terminal illness. It's called life. But we as a society live in denial of that. So we have a real problem with death, and we push it aside, and we say it's never going to happen to me, or it's going to happen one day. It's always one day. But I have to tell you, I won't out anybody here, but someone I know I'm very close to in their 80s, has always had this fear of death. And then someone very close to them went through a transition through hospice, and they saw the process, and their fear was greatly alleviated when they finally just sat down and saw the process, and how the hospice really helped through that, and how the person that was transitioning was a very peaceful transition. Mm-hmm. So I think we just all have to accept the fact that we're going to go through this, and, let's get through it the best way possible, and understand that, this is what we're programmed. This is all part of the plan.
It's very much a part of life. We are born, we experience, and we die. That's the name of the game. And yet, as you said, we live under the illusion that other people die, but certainly not me or anyone close to me. Yeah. And that's the illusion that we carry with us until life hits us in the face and we're dealing with someone close to us dying.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, because my beliefs around death are very spiritual, and I know you're a hospice nurse, so your job is to be there for the family and the medical aspect of it largely. But for me, what brings me a lot of comfort is knowing that we are spiritual beings and that we do go on. As you've experienced people going through the dying process, have you noticed that spiritual beliefs make a difference in how easy the transition is?
Not really.
Okay.
You would think that going to another life would be reassuring. But when it really gets down to the moment, and I'm going to take that back, because at the moment, we, the watchers, don't know what the person is thinking. Right. What I have determined from watching them and listening to what they would say, and in the weeks before to hours before death, the person is not rational. They're talking to and about things that we don't see and can't hear. So listening to that, what I've learned is that we take our spiritual belief with us. If I believe that Jesus is going to be there to meet me, then I may see Jesus and I may talk about Jesus. Mm-hmm. If I believe that nothing happens, then I'm not going to see Jesus or the Buddha or whatever. I will see nothing because that's my belief.
Mhm.
We take our belief with us. And um, sometimes those of us that left a belief system when we were younger and now we're facing death, sometimes people go back to that original belief,
Mhm.
but most of the time we hold on to whatever belief about afterlife and spirituality that we have worked so hard to believe or disbelieve in our living.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've heard of experiences. I haven't had them, of course, but I've heard of experiences, as you said, people talking to people that we don't see, and reaching out, even physically reaching out to people. And a lot of talk about, and this is from the work of Raymond Moody and Lisa Smart, about, what Raymond Moody calls nonsense, because it's nonsense to us, but it might make sense on a different level. And people talk about traveling and packing for trips. Have you had those experiences?
Absolutely. And what I've come to believe is that those people that have gone before us, that have died before us, come to be with us to help us get from this world to the next. I can tell you stories from now till next week that have convinced me we do not die alone.
Hmm.
There are our loved ones that have gone before us. There are spiritual beings that are there to guide us. You can be on a deserted island and you will not die alone.
I think that's so important. So I want to emphasize that point, because I work with a group called Helping Parents Heal, and so we're parents whose children have transitioned. And as parents, we want to know our kids are okay, and we want to know they weren't afraid. And I've heard so many parents say, she was alone or he was alone. I wasn't there for them. So I think it's really important that people understand that we don't transition alone, even though there might not have been someone in the room with them physically, that they are going to a world where they're received. And right before we got on this call, I was talking to a mother, and she was talking about her daughter had passed just a few months ago, and her husband had transitioned earlier. And she asked me, do I believe that her husband was there to meet her daughter? And I said, I absolutely do believe that he was there to meet her. So I like people having that comfort that, that we're going to be greeted by someone on the other side. So I appreciate you sharing that experience.
How about I tell you a story?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay, I took care of a woman that was young. She had a 2-year-old little boy. Took care of mom when she died, and a couple years later I got a call from the family, and the little guy was then 4 and he was dying. And so I started taking care of him.
Mm.
In the weeks before he died, he started telling everyone he was going to take a trip. He said, I can't live with you anymore. I'm going to go live with my parents, because
Mm.
both of his parents were dead. In the hours before he died, he started looking. We'd hold him in a rocking chair and just rock him. And he started looking around the room. And it was like the room was filled with people that we couldn't see. And he's looking, he's searching for something. So he's a window into the other world. So we asked him, we said, what are you doing? He said he was looking for his mom.
Mm.
And with all the energy, just before he died, he raised his hand, pointed to the upper corner of the bedroom, and called mom by name.
Mm.
He stayed focused on that corner until he took his last breath.
Mm.
You can't convince me that mom wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
And
And
I've got stories like that that I can go on and on and on.
well, those stories help. So if you have more to share, I'd be happy to hear more, because I was just talking to this mother, and she's a Christian. She believes, but I think a lot of times our faith, until it's really tested, really pushed, that's when we find out how much we really do believe. And I was telling her, for myself, it's been 4 years for me since my daughter transitioned. It's daily. It's every day I work on maintaining this belief and understanding and studying. So, and stories help a lot.
It's not okay for our children to die. There's this law that says children don't die.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do, a law is broken. It is an entirely different kind of grief than the grieving that you have for your 80-year-old grandma.
Absolutely.
It's totally different. And as a parent, I can't even comprehend because my children are still alive. But I will say that we have to look and see what our purpose is for being on this planet and move forward with that. Mm-hmm. And as you said, you never recover from grief. You learn how to live with it.
Right. So yeah, if you have another story you can share with us, that'd be great.
Oh, let's see. I took care of he was teenager, probably 13, 14, and he was a huge baseball fan. And that he had been sick for most of his life. Mm-hmm. His brother had died before he died from the same disease. And the family did not want him to die at home. And so when he was hours before death, we transferred him to the hospital. So we're in the hospital, and there was a baseball game on the radio. And because he was such a baseball fan, we had the game on. And there's family all around. And at some point, we noticed that this young man was talking very softly, but talking nonstop. And so we started listening to what he was saying. He was almost like broadcasting the game. What was on the radio in that room, he was verbalizing it. It was like he was at the game. When the game was over, then he died.
Wow.
And what does that tell me, aside from being, wow, that's an interesting story, is that there's so much that we don't understand about the mind, about living, about dying, and all that happens. But there is so much more than just this physical world.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, as someone that deals with death and dying, some people would say, well, that's a heavy burden, to be around all that sadness and all that. But I don't get that sense from you at all. I feel like, you get a sense of purpose out of doing what you do, and educating people. So have you ever felt like this is too much or this is too heavy?
I really haven't. It's almost like this is what I'm on the planet for, is to do this work. That's my purpose. But I will say that before I got into this work, I had a foundation, a belief system that said there's more to the physical than this world and what we see. I had a foundation that was, we are born, we experience, and we die. And that death isn't the end of existence. So I had a foundation when I went into it. And I guess, and I sound a little speechless at the moment, but I think that that's why I'm here. And I have never looked back and said, oh, this was a mistake. I have kind of felt it was divine order all along that
Yeah.
brought me to this place.
So what was the decision process like going to become a hospice nurse? I mean, were you nursing before that and you decided to transition into hospice?
That's I graduated from nursing school right out of high school, with diploma school. Um, and then I got married 2 weeks after I got out of nursing school, and I never worked as a nurse. In fact, I decided I should have never been a nurse, that I made a huge mistake. I should have been a social worker,
Mhm.
but I raised a family. And it wasn't until the hospice philosophy, the end of life philosophy came to this country from England that I thought, wow, this is something I am interested in. This is something I can do. In hindsight, now I believe that what helped me see what I saw and learn what I learned is because I did not have any medical preconceived ideas that came from working as a nurse in other areas.
Hmm.
When I took a refresher course in nursing and then went straight into hospice, I was a clean slate, that I
Okay.
was able to see what was happening without preconceived conceived judgments
Hmm.
of how dying was dealt with by the medical establishment.
Hmm.
Because hospice in the 80s, when it first got here, it was meeting a need outside of the medical establishment.
Right.
And so now hospice is different. It's changed. It's gradually become more absorbed into the medical model. It has become more, dying has become more medicalized, which is why the door has opened for end of life doulas.
Okay. Interesting. So you think that as hospitals become more medicalized, has created the opportunity for the end of life doulas?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Now, I've heard, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I've heard that more nurses believe in the continuation of life than doctors. And the theory is that nurses are around the dying, whereas doctors are usually kind of away. And so nurses have these stories that, they've seen things like you've seen. Has that been your experience?
It's an interesting, I don't know, I have not heard that, but it makes perfect sense to me because medical school teaches science, and it really falls short on teaching humanity.
Hmm.
Our medical model is focused on diseases that people have, where end of life, and I'm hoping someday other medical professionals will see that we concentrate on people that have diseases. And that's where the humanity is in the people that have diseases. And nurses, when they get outside of the hospital and all the technology that they are forced to work with,
Hmm.
can see the humanity easier than a lot of physicians who that is their focus, is the disease that a person has.
Yeah, and I would think for doctors, I mean, the ultimate defeat is death. So, right, so they're never taught that death is part of life. That's the enemy.
That's the
Uh,
enemy.
yeah,
That's the failure. Absolutely.
yeah. But as we know, it is, and we would like to all live to 85 or 100 or whatever. But that's not the plan for everyone. And we have to figure out, what do we do when we're faced with these situations. And I think it's really, really important that I wrote a book just recently on grief, and one of the things I was saying is, like, most of us don't deal with it until we have to, absolutely have to. And if you're my friend, unfortunately, you have to deal with it because it's a big part of my life. So I was on vacation with some friends last week. We were talking about my book. We were talking about the IANS conference, and we were talking about things like that. And one of my friends shared with me like 3 just amazing stories of precognition, telepathy, whatever, from his childhood. I've known him for like 20 years. And I'm like, it's the first time I've ever heard this from, because we don't talk about it. And so everybody thinks it's rare, that these precognitive things, these telepathic things, they're rare, but when you start to talk, when people open up, then we realize there's so much more than what we experience. So I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of sharing this with people, to say, hey, there is a whole lot more.
Absolutely. And as I said, 90% of end of life is about education.
Yeah.
It's helping families and the community understand how people die and what's normal about it, to neutralize the fear.
Yeah. So your book is obviously done, or your booklet has done fantastic. You've written several other books too. Tell me about the other things you've written.
Okay, I started off with writing Gone From My Sight for
Mm-hmm.
my families, and as hospice has spent less time with families as death approaches, I wrote a booklet called The 11th Hour, which is a guide on what to do. Gone From My Sight says, here's what's happening when a person is dying. The 11th Hour says, here's what you can do while it's happening.
Okay.
Then I wrote a booklet for a person that has been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. It's called A Time to Live, because most people, when they've been told they can't be fixed, go home, sit down in their favorite recliner, and they might as well have died that moment because they stop living. And so I want them to see they've been given a gift, and that's a gift of time. And how are you going to use that time?
Yeah.
Then I've written a booklet, a grief booklet, called My Friend I Care, on just the normal basics of grief. Then a booklet on dementia at end of life, because dementia doesn't play by the rules.
Yeah.
And so it's entirely different when a person is dying. With today's opioid crisis and culture, I have written a booklet on pain at end of life, because most families are afraid of narcotics, and I want them to understand how they can be used appropriately at end of life.
Wow.
The pet booklet, A Place in My Heart. I have a blog that I write every couple of weeks that's on the website that people write me all the time. And so I'll write articles on what they've written.
Is that on bkbooks.com?
It is on bkbooks.com. I have DVDs. I have self-care for the medical professional on how to take care of themselves when they're working with end of life. They have unique challenges that other healthcare professionals don't have. Wow. So I have a DVD and a booklet for them. And I have a DVD called New Rules at End of Life, which is for the community. It's for training purposes. Yeah. That's the key things. There's more, but those are the key things.
Well, you just touched on so much there that I think that is so important. As I was telling you before we went on with my experience, we didn't have an end of life experience with my daughter in terms of being able to prepare. So it was just sudden. But for people that, as you said, someone that gets that diagnosis, what do I do for the families? How do I help them make that transition? I think that's all, very, very important work. You touched on dementia. I went through that with my father-in-law, and I'm going through it with my mother-in-law right now. And with dementia, it's like they're gone before they're gone. You and I both believe in the continuation of the soul, and I believe their soul is whole, but their body, they're not who they were. And in some cases, they're literally, their personality is completely changed. So how to deal with that's a real challenge. When you're looking at this person that's your mother, but they're not acting like your mother.
That's right. It's And it's becoming more and more and more predominant. More people are dealing with dementia and taking care of someone that has dementia. We need to support our caregivers. The person that has dementia is living in their own little world,
Right.
but that spirals out and affects family and the caregivers, and our medical system is not prepared or helping caregivers, and the caregivers have a whole set of unique challenges,
Yeah.
as you're aware of.
Yeah.
And they don't follow the same dying process that a person who has cancer or congestive heart failure goes through. It isn't until they stop eating that you can really see that they've entered the dying process, even though you have literally lost them years before
Yeah.
they.
Well, what would be some things you would say to a caregiver or a family member going through that to help them to deal with those challenges?
I would say that the Alzheimer's Association has support groups. You don't want to go through this alone. You need support to help you with it. That's number one. And you can't do it all, and you need help. And yet I know financially that's not always an option for the caregiver to get out, to have someone come in and stay with the patient for a while. It also gets to a point where oftentimes you can't keep them at home.
Mm.
And the guilt that goes with not being able to keep them at home is a big issue. There's just so much that financially, it's a huge burden that most families have to take on the care because they can't afford to financially to have the support that they need to stay healthy. And a lot of caregivers get sick
Mm.
and even die before the person that has the dementia dies.
So, so a person, the guilt, because guilt, I don't know why we do this to ourselves. Humans, like you were saying earlier, people going through the dying process and we say, I did something wrong, or I did something to cause it, or I starved them to death. And I've seen people dealing with someone with dementia and other medical complications that say, I want to take this all on myself. And I'll say to them, okay, if they're in care, they're going to have multiple shifts of people helping them. You can't do this on your own. So what would you say to someone like that?
I say that you've got to bring in family to help you. The goblins always come out at night. And so particularly with someone with dementia, if you're a solitary caregiver and night comes, how do you assure that this, in fact, I just talked with someone about this. How do you ensure that the person with dementia who's wandering around the house doesn't get out, doesn't fall? If you can't afford to get help, then you've got to pull on church groups. You can pull on family, and yet the caregivers tend to think I can do it all.
Yeah.
And they can't.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Even the financial situation is obviously very important, but there's this guilt. I think sometimes, I think especially with children, to a parent, like, oh, they took care of me, so I need to be there to take care of them. But the burden of a grown person who's able to get up and walk around and do things and eat the wrong things, as you said, get out of the house. None of us can take that on, as a full-time job. So
you can't, because the care is 24/7,
mm-hmm.
and we need sleep.
Yeah.
As caregivers, you got to go to sleep. You have to have some downtime. So You can love and care for mom or dad or whoever, but you have to stay healthy yourself in order to do that, in
Yeah.
order to provide care for them. So you have to reach out. And yet, one of the big challenges is, as you pointed out, mom took care of me and now it's my turn. Yes, it is. But you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of mom.
Yeah. So what would you say, I don't know if it's a good way to die or not, but what advice would you give to someone in terms of what are the things I should be doing to prepare, say I get that diagnosis? What types of things should I be doing to prepare for my transition? What types of things would you say to family, just in general? I know you've written tons and tons on this, and I recommend people to get your books, but just what are some general things?
Well, first off, from the time that you're 18 on, you need to have an advance directive. You
Mhm.
need to have a living will. Because if you don't and something happens to you, you will die the way the medical profession wants you to die, not the way you want to die.
Mhm.
And so from the time you're 18 on, and yet most people don't have a living will or an advance directive. And that's because if I think about death and dying, then surely I will die. So I'm just going to put it off.
I
But
did
that's number one.
that.
We need that. And then when we get that diagnosis, you have to get second and third opinions. You have to really communicate with your physician to see when they're talking treatment that what that really means,
Mhm.
because we sit there and we listen to our physician and we may not be understanding what they're saying. They may talk treatment, and in our mind that means I'm going to, when this is over, I'm going to be back living the way I was before I got sick. When the physician may be thinking, this treatment may give you 6 months
Right.
extra. So you've got to make sure to communicate. There are no questions that are silly or stupid. You've got to talk to your physician to make sure you're on the same page. And then when it's determined that you can't be fixed, then figure out where, most of us want to be at home with the cat on the bed, and then think about how you can make that happen.
Mhm.
I hear a lot, don't tell mom the doctors can't fix her. We don't want her to lose hope. Well, we live inside of our body. And at some point, every person who's dying knows they're dying. It's
Mhm.
no secret. And what you deprive mom of by not sharing and talking about end of life with her is the opportunity to put her affairs in order,
Right.
the opportunity to say goodbye, and you really wasted your gift of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I think that makes so much sense. And I feel fortunate that my parents, they're both in the early 80s, have let us know what their wishes are. So we don't have to wonder, and we don't have the guilt of, should I pull the plug, a terrible term, or should I terminate, support, or should I not? Do they want a funeral or do they not? Do they want to be cremated or do they not? And I think it's important to have those conversations. And you were talking about people avoid the living will. It was until I had both my children and I was sitting down with my financial planner and he forced me to do a will that I went through that, because no one wants to think about those things.
I
But
know.
my daughter was 15 when she passed, and so I was suddenly sitting here having to make these decisions, like what would she want me to do. I was just fortunate, and I don't think it was fortunate, it was an act of God, or whatever you want to call it, synchronicity. A couple weeks before she passed, she was playing with her cousins, and she said she wanted to be cremated and buried under a tree. She was 15 years old. And she just said that out of the blue. And when we went to talk to my other daughter about what we should do with her remains, she said, well, Shayna told me, we had made the decision, my wife and I had, and we went to my other daughter. She goes, that's okay, because Shayna said that's what she wanted to do. But that's rare, for a 15-year-old. But as adults, take that burden off of your family. Don't leave that to them. Let them know what your wishes are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the responsibility for those making the decisions will affect the remainder of their life.
Mm-hmm.
They will live with the guilt, the indecision, the confusion forever. And as parents, we don't want to do that to our adult children.
Yeah.
As parents, we want our adult children to figure out how to go on living without us. And so we need to make those advanced planning and the living wills.
Yeah, I
and have a durable power of attorney.
Yeah.
Durable power, medical power of attorney.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Well, I really have enjoyed meeting you today and talking with you. I want to talk about your website. It's BK as in Barbara Karnes books.com. That's books with an S. Sounds like you've got some fascinating books and educational materials there. So I want to encourage people to go take a look at those and to do what we all need to do to plan for our eventual, I hate the word demise, but our departure, and take that burden off of other people. And I want to say thank you for what you do. I think it's really, really important work. And as you said, I think that's, you're fulfilling your purpose of being here.
It was very nice meeting you, Brian.
All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hey, thanks for watching. Before you leave, I'd like to just remind you, you can always find me at www.grief2growth.com. That's grief2growth.com. And you can schedule a free half-hour consultation if you'd like. Also, before you leave, please click on the like button here, click on subscribe, and click on the bell. By clicking like, YouTube will show the video to more people, and by subscribing and clicking the bell, you'll be notified when I release new material. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.